Okay, now that we know what quarterbacks are actually playing, what quarterbacks are going to be missing, let's go through, let's look at some updated projections, not only to see if we like any of these pick'ems on Underdog Fantasy, but also we want to go through and use them as a tool to make better start-sit decisions. That way we can have realistic expectations and realistic projections. Because if ESPN goes out there and puts out a projection in your app, ultimately it doesn't matter because you can't go higher or lower on it. Like if they're wrong, ESPN doesn't care at all. If Underdog's wrong about this and say Matthew Stafford has more than 2.5 rushing yards and everybody knows it and everybody goes takes more than, Underdog can lose a lot of money. So it's very valuable to be looking at these data points. Now, first thing that I actually see that stands out is almost immediately. Obviously, you're going to be starting Cooper Kupp. Is more than less than 15.5 fantasy points for this week. But what I actually kind of like is I like going through and taking the lower than 12 targets. I mean, yeah, definitely want the guy in our starting lineup, but with Puka still being there, while I understand that we can expect both these wide receivers to clear maybe 20%, to clear a total of 50% of this team's target share, still at the end of the day, to project any player out for 12 targets is going to be an incredibly aggressive number, which I'm going to take the other side on. Now, if we're looking at everybody else here, I mean, the tight ends don't matter. The defensive players don't matter. The other player that will matter to actually look at in Los Angeles will be Darrell Henderson. They have Henderson at 8.5 fantasy points. I think that Henderson is someone that you can start as a low-end RB2 if you had Kyron Williams and you don't have him anymore, and we need someone else to go with. Now, Dak, 17.5 fantasy points. We're going to leave him be. Tony Pollard, y'all know a running back that we were talking about as a buy low candidate who right now is averaging about 16 rushing attempts per game and averaging about 5 receptions per game. Currently has his pick'em at 15 fantasy points already through his bye week, 96.5 total yards. As I discussed previously, I did not draft a lot of Tony Pollard, but if you're looking at his week-to-week projections, it's going to be very difficult to not say this is a buy low guy. You have Lamb at 12 fantasy points. You're still clearly starting him. I mean, Brandon Cooks, clear stay away. I wouldn't even mind if you wanted to go fewer than 5.5 targets. Michael Gallup, clearly staying away. I don't know why I'm wasting your time with these guys. Let's go over to Jacksonville, however, where here, I mean, y'all know I have all the Travis Etienne in the world. I mean, we drafted Etienne as our third most drafted running back in Underdog drafts this offseason. On top of this, week 1, we said to buy low. Week 2, we said to buy low. Week 3, we said to buy low. Week 4, we said to buy low. And now we said, yes, if you could sell Travis Etienne and go get Tony Pollard, if you could sell him and go get Austin Eckler, I would. I think all players project similarly rest of season. My difference is I think you're looking at those other guys already through their bye weeks. You're going to get an extra game, which matters a lot by the time we get to week 8. And if you're looking at the projected pick'em that you have a Travis Etienne here, he's at 13.95 fantasy points. And going back to previously what we were saying with Tony Pollard, you have Tony Pollard instead sitting up there at 15 fantasy points. So the projections actually lean Pollard over Travis Etienne. Clearly, you're starting both of these guys, but I just want to give you all a little bit more of an explanation on why I was going out there and saying to sell Etienne for Pollard. I know a lot of people got upset with us. There's a lot of people, because of what we said, have Travis Etienne on their roster. But if you really think Etienne's that much better than Pollard, you can go take the more than 13.9 fantasy points with Etienne, the fewer than 15 fantasy points with Pollard. Given the matchup for Pollard, I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do it if you want. Now, Ridley, someone you're not really starting. I mean, you can if you need to, 51.5 total yards for his pick'em. Kirk does project out to be a better receiver than Ridley at this point, 55.5 receiving yards. Obviously, Evan Ingram will be a must-start guy. And moving this over to Pittsburgh, Kenny Pickett, I mean, not necessarily someone we're looking at. I mean, he has that 15 fantasy points. Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, we've talked about this for a while now. They're handcuffed running backs. If Najee goes down, you have to start Jalen Warren. If Jalen Warren were to go down, then you have to start Najee Harris. However, Najee's at 7.85 for his pick'em. And then you have Jalen Warren at 47.5 yards. Not going to be starting either guy. Deontay Johnson, they have at 9.15 fantasy points. More so as that low-end wide receiver one. They have him right in line with George Pickens. George Pickens is only at 9.45. So the wide receiver gaps that you're going to be noticing here, I mean, they're so damn close. And this is what we're talking about a lot, right? If we are looking at wide receivers in these tiers, I mean, really calling your shot isn't as important as just understanding the correct roster construction and strategy and building your team, because a lot of these guys are the same. Now, this Jalen Hurts pick'em that you're going to see more than less than half a total yard, this is only going to be if you are new to Underdog Fantasy. And if you're new to Underdog, of course, it's not too late to sign up. You can still find that link in the live chat description, comment section. Promo code FLOCK, you're going to get a 100% deposit match. If you're new to Underdog Fantasy, you're also going to get our rankings as well as a Jalen Hurts special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard. That's the usual offer that they have for new people signing up. But on top of that, we are actually hooking y'all up with an Amon-Ra St. Brown Flock exclusive pick'em. That doesn't matter if you signed up to Underdog 2 years ago, last year, yesterday, today, tomorrow, you will get an extra pick'em on top of it. So make sure you take advantage only with code FLOCK. But also with Jalen Hurts, if you don't have the more than less than half a total yard, I don't mind going through and saying that he's going to get a tush push touchdown and saying that Jalen Hurts will at least have one rushing touchdown here. Now, let's go ahead and move on beyond this. DeAndre Swift, obviously going to be a must-start running back at this point. 12.5 fantasy points for his more than less than. Devonta Smith still will be someone that I'm looking to start. You see that he's right in line with George Pickens. 8.5 fantasy points. Just, it is a really good matchup against Washington. So I'm starting everybody that we can in this Philly offense. Going over to the Washington side, Brian Robinson, not startable. Horrible matchup. Usage trending in the wrong way. I mean, he's only at 38.5 rushing yards for his pick'em. Terry McLaurin, you can start him if you want. Obviously, they have him up there at 10 fantasy points. I wouldn't even mind to go with the fewer fantasy points on McLaurin, the more than fantasy points on Devonta Smith, because honestly, I would probably rather have Smith over McLaurin this week. But they're saying that you can go through and start him. And Logan Thomas, right there at 31.5 receiving yards, similar to pretty much everybody you're going to find. New England, I don't even know if we want to look at any of these guys. I mean, yeah, Mac Jones, 231.5 total yards. You have Ramondre at 16.5 total yards. I mean, 1.5x if you go with the rushing touchdown. Ezekiel Elliott, they have at 40 yards. The thing is with these backs, they're splitting the backfield. They're in a horrendous offense. And at the same time, come on. What are we supposed to do when Ramondre is just one of the least efficient running backs? And how the hell do you think that this is a video, my friend? We have people in the live stream right now when YouTube is saying that we are live streaming, claiming that this is a video. How would that even be possible? Maybe you're giving us a lot of credit here for just being able to be arguably the best live stream on the planet. Obviously joking. But going over to the Miami game, highest implied team total of any game this week. You want to start all these guys. Jeff Wilson Jr. at 20.5 rushing yards. We're not starting Jeff Wilson Jr., but definitely still someone we're rostering to see if the usage changes at all. You have Mostert at 68.5 total yards. You have Tyreek Hill, must-start guy, Jalen Waddle. I'm not going to waste your time with this. Let's go over to New Orleans, however, where you have Alvin Kamara. We actually pointed out earlier in this week, more than 4.5 receptions for Alvin Kamara. That was something that we are looking at. Now that pick'em has been moved up to higher, lower than 5 receptions. 5 receptions, I'm going to stay away. Honestly, 4.5, I liked. 5 is just a little bit too much there. Chris Olave at 57.5 total yards. Olave is going to be someone that you are starting. Now, going over to what we have with our next team, I don't want to waste your time with Shaheed or Michael Thomas. Let's look at the Indianapolis Colts. Gardner Minshew, a viable streamer if you needed to. But you have Jonathan Taylor way the hell up here at 14.25 fantasy points. They have Jonathan Taylor with a higher pick'em on his fantasy points than what you are getting with Travis Etienne right now. That is not to say that I'm ranking Taylor over Etienne. Of course, look at my rankings. It is just to point out that Jonathan Taylor is a must-start running back. He is an elite running back. And for the love of God, do not have him on your bench. Okay. Now we have some receivers down here on this team as well. Let's skip over to the Jets. I mean, with Michael Pittman, with Josh Downs. You can start both guys. Downs like 48.5 receiving yards. Breece Hall, they have at 90.5 total yards. They have Breece Hall for fewer total points than Jonathan Taylor. Just giving you a baseline on expectations for Jonathan Taylor this week. They have Garrett Wilson at 9.9 fantasy points, almost 60 receiving yards. So despite this offense being so bad, I mean, you are going to have to go through. You're going to have to start those two guys. We kind of already know that, though. Now let's move this over to the Giants. Really, the only question is, one, is Darren Waller playing? We don't know that just yet. And two, can we trust Saquon Barkley with how bad this offense is? Horrendous offensive line and Daniel Jones. Yes, you can start Saquon Barkley. They have him more than less than 96.5 total yards, which is more than Breece Hall, which is more than Travis Etienne. So please make sure you put him in here. Now, going over to what we have in Minnesota, Alexander Mattison split in the backfield with Cam Akers. I wouldn't mind actually looking at the fewer than 66.5 total yards for Alexander Mattison this week. I don't think you can start either running back. Jordan Addison, last week we hit on the 2x multiplier with his touchdown. This week, you'd only get a 1.25x multiplier. So honestly, I don't think that's something we want to look at. I think that will be a stay away. You still start Addison, you still start Hawkinson, and you still bench everybody else in this offense until Jefferson comes back. Now, going over to Green Bay, you have earlier in the week, one of my favorite pickems being Jordan Love for fewer than 231.5 passing yards. However, Jordan Love has been moved down to 219.5 passing yards, so that's now going to be a stay away for me. Earlier in the week as well, you'll see with Aaron Jones, they only have Aaron Jones at 57.5 total yards. This is lower than Ramondre Stevenson. You can't start either Green Bay running back at this moment. Hopefully Jones breaks out and hopefully we can start him next week. But earlier in the week, I really liked the Christian Watson for fewer than 58.5 receiving yards. Now they have Christian Watson down at 46.5 receiving yards. I would say that this is a clear stay away. Like I said, 58.5 receiving yards. I'm going the lower. 46.5 receiving yards. Honestly, I wouldn't even mind if you want to go with the higher if you took the lower earlier in the week and want to just play the middle game. And with Watson, probably not starting him until we actually see something similar to Aaron Jones. Now, going over to Atlanta. We don't really care about Desmond Ridder. You're not starting Ridder regardless. Looking at Bijan Robinson earlier in the week, we really liked more than 79.5 total yards. That is now at 82.5 total yards. I don't want to tell anybody to go through and take Bijan here. I may do it just because I like having fun. I like rooting on the guys that I want to root for. In reality, hook 'em horns. I am the most biased guy that you would ever ask. Oh, you sucks. Get your horns up. And I think that Bijan Robinson is still a must-start running back. Going over to Kyle Pitts, you have Kyle Pitts at 34.5 receiving yards. Really, in my mind, nobody's interesting in this offense but Bijan. Now, Derrick Henry is a running back that's interesting, right? Because you have a ton of trade rumors regarding Derrick Henry. So you could say, oh, okay, well, maybe they go through and maybe they play it safe with Derrick Henry. Maybe they don't want him to get injured. Or you could flip it to the other end of the spectrum and you go, oh, maybe they want to highlight what Derrick Henry can do. Maybe they want to bump up. I don't know what's going to happen with these trade rumors. I just know that you are most likely going to be in a situation where they look to run the ball consistently with no Ryan Tannehill. I don't think the offense is going to be that much worse with no Tannehill. And I think Derrick Henry to score 10.5 fantasy points is a very fair mark. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm interested in that. None of the receivers are interesting at all in this offense, however, until we see what Will Levis can do. Now, going over to Houston, CJ Stroud, they only have a 239.5 passing yards, kind of telling you to bench CJ Stroud, even if this is a good matchup. And then obviously, pretty good spot for the running backs. You have Dameon Pierce at 64.5 total yards. You have Devin Singletary at 42.5. So they're projecting the overall Texans backfield to have over 100 rushing yards. Clearly, it's a great matchup against Carolina. The issue is good luck predicting who it's going to be. So in reality, you're probably not starting the running backs. And I do not mind with Robert Woods being out to go more than 6.5 targets for Nico Collins. I actually think that Nico Collins is going to be a must-start wide receiver this week for me. And then I know a lot of people will be interested in Tank Dell as well. Tank Dell, they currently have at 3.5 receptions, 46.5 receiving yards. If you wanted to go more than 3.5 receptions on Tank Dell, you do you. I'm not going to do it. I think he's a borderline wide receiver 3 this week, but definitely an interesting play with no Robert Woods. There are just so many great wide receivers that it's hard to go out there and say to play all of them, right? Now, Miles Sanders is back. Miles Sanders not in the injury report. They're projecting this out to be a 50-50 split. You have Miles Sanders, 53.5 total yards. Chuba Hubbard at 51.5 total yards. In reality, you're going to be benching both these guys. Adam Thielen, must-start player. They have him at 67.5 total yards. You're not playing anybody else in Carolina but Thielen. Now, very tough spot where you have PJ Walker in at quarterback for the Browns. You have Njoku, similar. I mean, pretty much all tight ends here in this massive tier where they're all about 31.5 receiving yards. You can start David Njoku if you want. Very similar like Kyle Pitts, Logan Thomas. They're all about the same at this point. Going over to Seattle, Kenneth Walker is good to go. Kenneth Walker is at 81.5 total yards. Very tough matchup against the Browns. Keep that in mind. Lockett is good to go. Very tough matchup against the Browns. Only at 8 fantasy points more than less than. DK Metcalf, very tough matchup against the Browns. Only at 9 fantasy points more than less than. Obviously, you're not starting JSN in a very tough matchup with both those wide receivers in. I mean, in reality, I'm not too excited about anybody in Seattle in this game. Now, going over to Burrow. You have Burrow at 17 fantasy points. It's just a very tough matchup against the 49ers where this is in San Francisco and the 49ers are pretty big favorites. You have Mixon at almost 11 fantasy points. I actually wouldn't mind going more than 11 fantasy points with Mixon. I thought about going with the fewer than 11 targets with Jamar Chase, similar to the fewer than Cooper Kupp, 12 targets. My one hesitation is if this team gets down big, they may just be throwing the ball over and over and over again in the second half, though. And DK Metcalf, they only have at 9 fantasy points. I'm sorry, T. Higgins only at 9 fantasy points. So probably a stay away for the time being until we actually see him go out there and produce. Now, CMC last week, I know a lot of people were able to take advantage. Underdog threw out a more than less than half a rushing touchdown mark, and everybody ran to grab the more than half a rushing touchdown. If they do it again, I'll keep you updated. As of now, they do not have the half a rushing touchdown mark on CMC. Clearly, you're starting him regardless. And I owe y'all an apology. I was actually going through and taking the fewer than 64.5 receiving yards on Brandon Ayuk earlier in the week when I thought Sam Darnold was going to be the quarterback. But now that you have no Debo and it's actually Brock Purdy, I'm going to be staying away. I'm not going to be taking the fewer than 67.5 yards on Ayuk. And then Kittle at 47.5 yards, must start guy if you have no Debo and you have Purdy in here. But let's move this over to KC. Travis Kelce, do not mind to go out there and say he's going to have a touchdown. Now, I do want to continue to monitor the weather that we have in Denver. I don't necessarily think that you should go out there and take that right now. Obviously, you're starting Kelce regardless. I just want to make sure that it's not going to be a super snow game before you were to go through and take that. Now, I know everybody wants to play Rashee Rice, and I really like Rashee Rice's upside rest of season. I'm winning a lot of money in underdog drafts right now because Rashee Rice was my most drafted Kansas City Chief wide receiver. They only have him at 8 fantasy points, right in line with like Tyler Lockett, 5.5 targets. He's been on a hot streak when it comes to efficiency and his touchdown rate. In reality, projecting that going forward is going to just be much tougher to do. Going over to Denver, you don't start anybody. I mean, and I would even go as far as saying Javonte Williams, who they have at 66.5 total yards. I'm completely fine taking the fewer than on that point, because ultimately, this is one of the worst offenses in the NFL, and he is in a 3-man running back by committee. Now, going over to Baltimore, you're firing up Lamar, fire up Mark Andrews, fire up Zay Flowers. They have Zay Flowers over 10 fantasy points here. And then obviously we're not starting any of these secondary receivers. We were talking about Odell in our waiver wire video saying don't get suckered in, don't pick him up. He's only at 30.5 receiving yards. If you have Odell, probably it's time to cut him. Now, going over to Arizona, we were hoping it was going to be Kyler this week, even if it was a long shot. Not Kyler Murray. You have Joshua Dobbs. Hollywood Brown in here at 9.5 fantasy points. So this is going to be lower than what we were looking at with like Zay Flowers. And McBride is up there at 33.5 receiving yards, which is right in line with what you have in Kyle Pitts, right in line with what you have in David Njoku. So, I mean, obviously you're not super excited about any of those players, but ultimately at the end of the day, I mean, you can start McBride if you really needed to. Now, going over to Chicago, we don't care about the quarterback play. I mean, we're not going to be starting anybody here not named Justin Fields. Roschon Johnson, they have at 45.5 total yards. They have Deonta Foreman at 58.5 total yards. This is the issue. I mean, ultimately, you just can't start either guy if they are going to be splitting this backfield, of course. Okay. Now, with DJ Moore, you have DJ Moore at 57.5 receiving yards. Still in that mix, wide receiver 2. You probably start him regardless of if you have Justin Fields or not. Cole Kmet, they actually have with fewer receiving yards than someone like Trey McBride. I'm still ranking Kmet over McBride, but it is worth pointing out that maybe Kmet's not just a no-brainer play here. Now, looking over, our next team will be the Los Angeles Chargers. I don't know if we really need to focus in on this. You start Justin Herbert. You start Austin Eckler. You start Keenan Allen. Joshua Palmer still is going to be a game time decision. Right now, we have some Twitter doctors saying that Palmer's probably not going to play, which is why I wouldn't mind at all to go out there and say Keenan Allen's going to be picking up more than 4 first downs. Y'all know Keenan, really the chain mover in this offense, not that deep threat, which is why I do like Keenan Allen for more than 4 first downs with no Mike Williams, with no Joshua Palmer, with Quentin Johnson just giving you absolutely nothing. Then going over to the Raiders, Jimmy Garoppolo is playing. You have to start Jacobs. Please do not listen if anybody tells you to bench Jacobs. He's at 13.5 fantasy points. You look at the other wide receivers. Wide receivers are only hovering 8 to 10 when you're looking at those wide receiver 2 marks. The running backs with guaranteed volume, you have to start. Devontae Adams, 12 fantasy points. You have to start him. They have him 72.5 receiving yards. That's more than Adam Thielen. Jacoby Myers, you have to start. They have him at 61.5 receiving yards. That's more than someone like DJ Moore. You're starting those 3 guys and then really nobody else. Now, what's very interesting to look at will be the Detroit Lions. If you are looking at Gibbs here, you have Gibbs at 95.5 total yards. So Gibbs is projected out to be a top 3 running back in fantasy this week. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown at 83.5 receiving yards. You start both. You bench Jameson. And you go ahead and you play Sam Laporta. Not too much to discuss there. But remember, if you signed up with code FLOCK on Underdog, you are going to be getting that Amon-Ra St. Brown special pick'em more than less than half the total yard. And if you're not on Underdog already, it's not too late. You can still sign up with promo code FLOCK. Find that link in the description, in the comment section, in the live chat. You will also get the usual offer. That Amon-Ra St. Brown one is a code FLOCK exclusive. But you'll also get Jalen Hurts more than less than half a total yard. And on top of that, a 100% deposit match and our rest of season rankings. But I think that's all I have for you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again. I really do appreciate you. And really hope I get to see you in the live stream probably in about 3.5 hours answering all your questions.